जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शतशि श्रीमद् डिवाइन ग्रेस ऑफ चरण अरविंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे। हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, Chapter 13, The Appearance of Lord Varaha, text number 11. Satvamasya Apatyani. Satvam Asyam Apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Utpadya sasa dharmena. Utpadya sasa dharmena. Gham yagnai purusham yaja. Gam yagnai purusham yaja. Satwamasyam apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Utpadya sasadharmena. Gam yagnai purusham yaja. Satvam asyam apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Utpadya sasadharmena. Gam yagnai purusham yaja. Satvam apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Utpadya sasya dharmena. Kam yagnai Satvamasya patyani. Atmano gunai. Utpadya sasya dharmena. Gham yagnai purusham yaja. Samyaja. Satvamasya apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Utpadya sasadharmena. Gam yagnai purusham yaja. Satvam asyam apatyani. Sadrishanyatmano gunai. Tadidasya dharmena. Samyajnaya Purusham Yaja. Word for word, Saha, therefore, that obedient son, Tvam, as you are, Asyam, in her, Apatyani, children, Sadrishani, equally qualified, Atmanaha, of yourself, Gunaihi, with the characteristics, Utpadya, having begotten, Shasha, rule, Dharmena, on the principles of devotional service, Gam, the world, Yagnai, by sacrifices, Purusham, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Yaja, worship. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charanavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: Since you are my very obedient son, I ask you to beget children qualified like yourself in the womb of your wife. Rule the world in pursuance of the principles of devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus worship the Lord by performances of yajna. Purport: the purpose of the material creation by Brahma is clearly described herein. Every human being should beget nice children in the womb of his wife as a sacrifice for the purpose of worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead in devotional service. In the Vishnu Purana 3.8.9, it is stated, Varnashmacharavata Purushena Parapuman Vishnur Aradyate Panta Nanya Tatto Shakaranam. One can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu by proper discharge of the principles of Varna and Ashrama. There is no alternative to pacifying the Lord by execution of the principles of the Varnashrama system. Vishnu worship is the ultimate aim of human life. Those who take the license of married life for sense enjoyment must also take the responsibility to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, and the first stepping stone is the Varnashrama Dharma system. Varnashram Dharma is a systematic institution for advancing in worship of Vishnu. However, if one directly engages in the process of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it may not be necessary to undergo the disciplinary system of Varnashrama Dharma. The other sons of Brahma, the Kumaras, directly engaged in devotional service, and thus they had no need to execute the principles of Varnashrama Dharma. Translation again: Since you are my very obedient son, I ask you to beget children qualified like yourself in the womb of your wife. Rule the world in pursuance of the principles of devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus worship the Lord by performances of yajna. Om Jnanatimrandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasme Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tamsajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mukham karati vachalam bhangam langayate girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurun Teemtharanam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanyeshwaram. Hare Krishna. So we're continuing conversation between Lord Brahma and Swayambhuv Manu. After Manu asked Lord Brahma what he should do to please his father, along with his wife, Brahma gives him few congratulatory words and instructions to the rest of humanity to be able to understand the glorious nature and characteristics of Swayambhuv Manu. And now in text 11, he gives two verses, text 11 and 12, in three verses of instructions to Swayambhuv Manu, which is quite interesting because these three instructions are in one sense, the seed of Swayambhuv Manu's dharma, or his occupational duty for serving Lord Brahma within the universe. So these three verses appear to be very small and simple, but they hold a huge amount of knowledge and wisdom and also instruction for us. So take today's verse for example. Lord Brahma is asking Swayambhuv Manu to beget children qualified like himself in the womb of his wife and to rule the world in pursuance of the principles of devotional service and thus worship the Lord by yajna. So, first, since you are my very obedient son, so Manu has the qualifications as a proper disciple in one sense of Lord Brahma. Being the son and the dependent of Lord Brahma, he is also a disciple of Lord Brahma. And being very obedient, Lord Brahma is very pleased to impart knowledge upon him. And what are these instructions? First, I ask you to beget children qualified like yourself in the womb of your wife. So the first thing is that, as we've seen in the previous verses, that the son is meant to follow the instructions of the father. And by doing so, the son becomes glorified. And since Swayambhuv Manu himself was a very obedient son, therefore, Lord Brahma is asking him for his own benefit and for the benefit of the universe to beget children qualified like himself. And to beget children qualified like oneself is an extremely difficult task. Because to have children is a very serious commitment and responsibility. And to train them up in Krishna consciousness and to train children up in practicing Krishna consciousness to be qualified like yourself is an extremely difficult task. But Swayambhuv Manu is qualified to do so. You can even take, for example, when you bring or preach to devotees in Krishna consciousness, that we ourselves have experienced, even looking back when we came to Krishna consciousness and being preached to, how much of our own desires, how much of our own speculations, how much of our own understanding blocked how much we were able to accept what came from the other devotees. And to be able to become purified and qualified, equally qualified as those who train us, is a very difficult task. In fact, some of us may even lament that if only I was much more surrendered, if only I was much more receptive, I would have advanced in my Krishna consciousness much, much more. So Prabhupada was very expert in training his disciples in that way. If you have a look, if you read Prabhupada, when he visits India, one of the questions he gets asked is that, Swamiji, what is your mystic power? Show us some wonderful display of power, mystic opulence. And Prabhupada would just sweep his hand and show his devotees, his disciples. Just see, these boys and girls from the Western countries, the European American boys and girls, they were hippies. They had given up civilized way of life and they were engaged in completely burning out, enjoying their senses. But just see now that they've become very bright and effulgent by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that they've given up meat eating, intoxication, gambling and illicit sex. the very same things that they were attached to. They've given it up, and now they've dedicated their whole life for the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if you actually have a look at Prabhupada's disciples, you can understand how simple and surrendered they were, to the extent that they are the standard on which we should follow. Why? Because, think about it, they had no understanding of Krishna consciousness whatsoever. They had nothing, no preempt or no past understanding of Krishna consciousness, Vedas, nothing. Whatever Prabhupada said, they simply just held on to it and continued. One day in Sydney, 1972, after Prabhupada had installed Shishi Radha Gopinath here in, I believe it was in Glebe. Oh yeah, Glebe. And so what happened was that the devotees were worshipping Radha Gopinath nicely. And suddenly they got a letter from Los Angeles saying that Prabhupada has asked that the deities be served bhog 7 times a day. And so the devotees were like, what's bhog? No idea. What's bhog? B-H-O-G. That's all that letter said, bhog. And so the devotees were completely confused. In fact, it's mentioned by Kurman Prabhu in the Great Transcendental Adventure. It's mentioned that every Indian descent or devotee or person, guest that came of that descent, they would come and they would attend the Sunday feast program, and they would interrogate them, what does bhog mean? And everyone would have no clue what bhog meant. No one. And then they thought, oh, this bhog must be very interesting. It must be very important if Krishna must be taking it 7 times a day. It must be something important. We're missing out on something. So it took months later for some devotee to have he was traveling through Sydney, and he had come from the States. And when he had entered, the devotees asked him, oh, bhog means bhoga. And the devotees were completely, what is the word? They were completely relieved. Oh yeah, we were already doing that anyway. So devotees, in another instance, Prabhupada had told, one devotee had told Prabhupada when he was in the USA, Prabhupada, this rice, dal, chapati and sabji is the best. There's nothing equivalent to that. And Prabhupada just, to encourage and to show, yeah, you can just live off this. You can just eat this day and night. Rice, dal, chapati and sabji. And so immediately letters were sent out throughout all of ISKCON that Prabhupada has said that all meals should be this one. And so the devotees in Sydney received it, and when they received it, then they thought, oh, it's going to be a bit austere. It's going to be a bit different. So then they just simply followed. The point I'm highlighting is that whatever Prabhupada said, that's it. That was law. And it's still law, because Prabhupada's books are law books for the next 10,000 years. They just simply followed Prabhupada. Whatever Prabhupada said, that's it. There's a funny story Radheshyam Prabhu tells, that one Gurukul teacher, a group of them had met Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was teaching them, telling them how Gurukul should be set up, how the children should be raised, how the education should be done. And then Prabhupada told, and they were talking, somehow or other they came across the topic of prasadam. And so somehow or other one of the teachers had asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada told them that the children should take a certain amount of chapatis every day. 2, 3, that should be enough for them. And these children were quite young. They were like just below 5, above 5, like that. So then a couple of years passed, and then the children and the other teachers were telling this particular person, this devotee, that the children are feeling more hungry, we should increase the amount of prasad. And this devotee said, only 2 chapatis per person. Prabhupada said, only 2 chapatis. So that's the other extreme, that they followed the letter of the law but not the spirit of the law. And what was the spirit? Prabhupada was telling that these children, they can only take this much at this time, don't force anymore. When they grow up, they can take more. So it takes a very sincere, surrendered soul to be able to take up the instructions of the spiritual master and to follow them. And such a sincere soul will become qualified or empowered to be able to carry out the instructions. Yasya deva para bhakti yata deva tata guru. That one who has implicit faith in the spiritual master, the import or the purport of the Vedic literature will be revealed unto them. It's not by mere academic study, by mental speculation, by one's own prowess and proficiency and skill then one will be able to get entrance into understanding Krishna consciousness. What to speak of Krishna consciousness, Vedic literature or the Vedic culture. It's practically impossible because it is all based on one's attitude of surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that surrender is shown through or to the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Guru. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is constantly giving instruction from within the heart, but we've neglected Him life after life, time after time. So naturally the Lord, as they say, it fell on deaf ears. So the Lord then takes He takes not extreme measures, but He takes precautionary measures by sending the spiritual master, the external representation of Him. Because you're not listening from within the heart, and Krishna is very anxious to bring you back to Godhead. So therefore He takes the next step to get His devotee to wake you up and to take you back to Godhead with Him. Okay, so this is the first thing. Beget children qualified like yourself. To have, so coming back to the point, to have children or have dependents that will listen to you and to follow you is a very difficult task to have qualified children. And if you see in the rest of the pastime, he had qualified children. He had 2 sons and 3 daughters. Uttanapad, Priyavata, Devahuti, Akuti and Prasuti. And they're all qualified children. So qualified that 2 of them got married to Prajapati Daksha, 1 to Kardama Muni. She was in fact the mother of Kapiladev, the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then you have Priyavat. Priyavat Maharaj created the Bhumandal and the Shaptadvip, the 7 islands. And then you have Uttanapad, in whose dynasty come so many great personalities like Dhruva Maharaj and King Prachinabari, the Prachetas, so on and so forth. So you can see that we're dealing with great personalities of great qualities. And Swayambhuv Manu is, in one sense, the beginning of such a great dynasty, beginning of the universe, or beginning of the dynasty of mankind. So this is the first instruction: beget children qualified like yourself in the womb of your wife. Rule the world in pursuance of Dharma. Prabhupada saying here the principles of devotional service. Because ultimately, as it's mentioned in Bhagavatam, that the paradharma, or the ultimate dharma or occupational duty one must perform for full satisfaction of the self, is to perform devotional service free of motive and uninterrupted for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That will give one full satisfaction. So he has to rule the world in pursuance of the Vedic literature, principles of devotional service under the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and finally yaja, worship the Lord by performances of yajna. Yajnat tat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana. So Tadatam karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. That he is instructing Swayambhuv Manu that you perform yajna for the sake of pleasing Lord Vishnu. Otherwise, any activity performed otherwise will simply cause bondage within this material world. So, in accordance with principles of devotional service, you'll see Swayambhuv Manu's lifetime, that it was completely dedicated to the Supreme Personality of Godhead's service. Now, in this purport, Prabhupada is emphasizing on Varnashrama Dharma. Why is Prabhupada emphasizing on Varnashrama Dharma? Because not everyone will be able to practice pure devotional service directly. Because of attachment to material desires, attachment to material objects, due to excessive indulgence in such things and becoming absorbed, entangled in the modes of material nature, living entities are not so very easily accepting of devotional service. So therefore this Varnashrama Dharma gradually promotes one to a platform to accept devotional service. As Prabhupada says, the mode of goodness is a springboard into spiritual life, into transcendental platform. So to gradually raise people who, or especially human beings, who are on the level of animals to the civilized platform, it begins with Varnashrama Dharma. And so how Varnashrama Dharma is linked up with devotional service, Prabhupada gives this quote, that one can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu by proper discharge of the principles of Varna and Ashrama. There is no alternative to pacifying the Lord by execution of the principles of the Varna Ashrama system. So therefore you see devotees practicing the Varnashrama Dharma system as an example to be followed. In fact, if you keep reading in the purport, Prabhupada clarifies the transcendental position. Because you may ask, where's our Varnashram Dharma in our society right now? That's later clarified by Prabhupada in the purport. But here the point is that Vishnu worship is the ultimate aim of life, of human life. Of human life. Remember. Because Prabhupada says you cannot teach a dog to do arati. And you can't teach dog self-realization. But we see in the examples of the devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that this process of Ananda, Kevala Ananda Kanda, this Sankirtan mission is so powerful that even dog can become glorified and liberated by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But in general, by performing Varnashram Dharma, one is able to execute one's duties for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And by doing so, one gradually comes to the platform of devotional service, performing activities simply for the worship, for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ahoitaki apratihata, without any motive for one's own sense gratification, and apratihata, uninterrupted. If you have a look at your own, or at least if I can see, if you have a look at my own devotional service, there is some motive and there is some interruption all the time. Prabhupada, sometimes devotee would ask Prabhupada, how is it that, we're Krishna conscious sometimes, and then sometimes suddenly Maya comes. And Prabhupada says, no, you're in Maya all the time, sometimes you're Krishna conscious. Right? So the point here is that we should understand our position, and that to get to the platform of uninterrupted devotional service requires the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore we take to devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master. And how does Varnashrama Dharma apply to us? A very simple yardstick or guidance that one can follow is that at least whatever ashrama we're in, we should follow that out very strictly. If we're in the brahmacharya ashram, we follow the brahmacharya ashram strictly. We follow the grihastha ashram, or in the grihastha ashram, we follow it strictly. Because by following our ashrams very strictly, it presents us, at least in the Krishna consciousness sphere, it presents us or gives us an opportunity of performing devotional service in a less agitating environment. Prabhupada writes, when Gajendra was fighting the crocodile for 1,000 celestial years, when it's mentioned that he was fighting the crocodile eventually won because the crocodile was in his element of strength. And so Prabhupada writes there, it is the duty of everyone to remain in their strength in Krishna consciousness, their position of strength. Why is that? It is hard to fight a battle against Maya in a very precarious situation. It's very difficult. But if you're in a peaceful situation, somewhat peaceful, not agitated, and you're in a protective environment, then to fight Maya is very easy. In fact, fighting Maya becomes a secondary objective. Simply serving Krishna becomes the main objective. And by serving Krishna, you can immediately understand that Maya is far, far away. Krishna Surya Sama, Maya Hoy Andakar. That Krishna is like sunlight. Krishna is the sun, and Maya is like darkness. So where's the question of darkness in the presence of the sun? So, by serving Krishna in such a way, by following our ashram duties very strictly, then we can very easily progress in Krishna consciousness. Then our environment will become surcharged in the spiritual atmosphere by the spiritual energy. Because you see, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that we can use anything in the service of Krishna. We're not false renunciates where we give up things simply because they will agitate us in Krishna consciousness. We go one step further to the point of utilizing everything in Krishna's service. You have a propensity to beget children, okay, beget Krishna conscious children. You have the propensity to perform austerities and penance, do it for the pleasure of Krishna. You have the propensity to earn and to get a lot of money, engage in Krishna's service. So our Krishna consciousness is a very simple process. If we just simply stick to the basics, which is the guidance of the spiritual master, following the 4 regulative principles and chanting Hare Krishna 16 rounds minimum daily, then naturally we'll be in a very simple position, very easy position of practicing devotional service. That any situation may come upon us, that will immediately jump back to Krishna consciousness. So, those who take the license of married life for sense enjoyment must also take the responsibility to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, and the first stepping stone is the Varnashram Dharma system. Varnashram Dharma is a systematic institution for advancing in worship of Vishnu. So Krishna himself makes it Chaturvanya Maya Shishta Gunakarma Vibhagasha. Krishna himself has made this system. It is not that we reject the system. Krishna has made the system and we apply the system, which is, as Prabhupada says, the next half. This is our heritage from Srila Prabhupada, what we've inherited. This task of implementing Varnashram Dharma within society. Because Prabhupada saw that not everyone was able to take up the Krishna consciousness, as I was saying before. They like to chant, they like to take prasad, but they're not able to give up their materialistic propensities. They're not able to give themselves up for the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So therefore there should be some opportunity for them to purify themselves to come to that platform. And therefore the Varnashram system should be established. However, if one directly engages in the process of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it may not be necessary to undergo the disciplinary system of Varnashram Dharma. The other sons of Brahma, the Kumaras, directly engaged in devotional service, and thus they had no need to execute the principles of Varnashram Dharma. So this again brings us to a very critical point. How do we know how much we should follow of the Varnashram system? Because after all, in the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu says that this is external. Varnashram Dharma, this particular verse is quoted, it's external. Right? It's external, we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about Sarva Dharmam Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Raja, that's external. Yad Kuroshi Yad Asnashi Yad Juhoshi Dadasi, that's external, we don't have to worry about that. No, actually a devotee follows all of this very strictly because they understand they set the example by following it. By following Krishna's instruction, the devotee sets the example. And in fact, when Mahaprabhu was talking to Ramananda Roy and saying this is external, we need to understand the context. Mahaprabhu was trying to get the essence out, trying to get to the topmost platform of serving Krishna. But all of these things bring one to that platform. So therefore, how do we understand it may not be necessary to undergo the disciplinary system of Varnashram Dharma? We need the guidance of the spiritual master. It seems like a very repetitive comment that whenever there seems to be some contradiction, a point of vagueness, it's not clear 1 or 0, just take guidance from the spiritual master, take guidance from the devotee. Because the principles are given in the Shastra, but the guidance given by the devotees, that is very valuable because of their experience and their realization. By following their footsteps, following their instructions, then it's very easy to understand where we fit in this whole system and to practice Krishna consciousness in that way. Because if by following the instructions of the spiritual master of the devotees, we're pleasing Krishna. We're pleasing Krishna. And by following their instructions and carrying out devotional service in that way, we are giving Krishna the topmost pleasure. Because first of all, we are sacrificing our own desires, our own, our own ego, our own desires for happiness. We think we know what's right. That's the first thing we sacrifice by taking the instructions of the devotees. And that pleases Krishna so much. Because how many lifetimes have we used that to block Krishna? So by following the instructions of the devotees, it pleases Krishna a lot. And by carrying out their instructions and sticking to it, Krishna is extremely pleased. So therefore we talk about following the instructions of the spiritual master. Second thing is that there are many quotes by the previous acharyas that state to the effect that who is there that's been able to become liberated without serving a Vaishnava? Narottam Das Thakur. Charya Vaishnava Sheva Nishterapaya Chakeva. Who is there that's been liberated without serving a Vaishnava? And the second, Harim Vina, there's this verse mentioned that you cannot surpass or overcome material existence, illusory energy of the Lord without taking shelter of a devotee. Prabhupada gives the example of the bound. One who is bound cannot help the other untie the other. Only those who are unbound can untie the bound. So all of these things are being mentioned by Prabhupada, the Shastra, to help us understand. In fact, the whole first canto, first chapter, purport, simply is focused on what? Submissive hearing. Simply on submissive hearing. If you go through the whole chapter, the purport, Prabhupada just hammers that one point. Submissive hearing, submissive hearing. Why? Because you're hearing from Prabhupada, you're hearing from the Shukadev Goswami, you're hearing from the Vaishnavas about how to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Who is Krishna? What is his qualities? What is his characteristics? So therefore the instructions of the spiritual master are very important. And therefore you're seeing this example of Swayambhuv Manu just taking the instructions of Lord Brahma on his head and just carrying it out. You see the example of Puru following the instructions of his father Yati. And you see the opposite or the reverse of how Prahlad Maharaj rejects his father. On what basis? That his father was not following Dharma. His father was not following Krishna consciousness. To the same extent, it's mentioned in Bhagavatam to follow the instructions of the spiritual master, Bali Maharaj rejected Shukracharya because he did not allow him or give him the proper instructions or the guidance to worship Vamandev. So you can see what does all of this what does it all rest upon? It all rests upon worship of Lord Krishna. It all rests upon pleasing Lord Krishna. Yena kena prakarena, yena tena prakarena, mana Krishna nivishyer. Sarva vidi nishedashur yetayora vikinkara. That somehow or other we must bring people to Krishna consciousness. And smartavya shatatam Vishnu vishmartavina na jatuchit. That we must always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. This is the essence of all instructions of the Shastra. So, when you have a look, the essence is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everything comes down to that one point. Do we accept the spiritual master or reject the spiritual master? How much is based on how much they're following Krishna. Do we accept the Father's instructions, reject the Father's instructions? It's in relation to Krishna's service once again. Like Prabhupada would often mention, he gave one advice, or one advice to his disciple that, your family will say so many things. You should do this, you should do that, and they're not Krishna conscious. You should do this, you should do that. Then your response will be yes, 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 and don't do it. Because you'll satisfy them, at the same time you'll remain Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada, by this example, he's teaching how to protect one's Krishna consciousness, how to protect one's devotional service. Nard Muni, same situation. He'll be preaching, someone will come and there's an instance in Bhagavatam, he'll be preaching, someone will come and say something, and Nard Muni say yes, yes, and he'll go. But he'll continue preaching elsewhere. Daksha, for example. Right? Anyway, that's a side point. So the point here is that everything is in relationship to the worship and satisfaction of Krishna. Yajnat tat karma nonyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartam karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. That the whole point is to worship Krishna. By everything we perform should be performed as a sacrifice for Krishna. Yad korosi yad asnasi yad juhosi dadasi yad tapasyasi kaunteya mad kurusva tat kurusva madarpanam. that everything you eat, whatever you do, whatever you eat, everything should be offered for the pleasure of Krishna. And that's the essence of our Krishna consciousness. What ashrama we follow, what occupation we do is simply for the pleasure of Krishna. Therefore, we devotees don't take up certain occupations. Right? Before coming to Krishna consciousness, you're part of the animal slaughter scene. Immediately given up, rejected. There's no such thing as a devotee performing such an activity like that. So therefore we follow in that particular rules and regulations, Varnashram Dharma, and that way progress under the guidance of the spiritual master, to the extent of being able to perform devotional service, ahoituki apratihata, without any ulterior motives and uninterrupted. Anyabhlishita sunyam jnana karma adyanavritam anukulyena krishna anusilam bhaktiruttama. That it's favorable for Krishna consciousness and it's freed, or favorable for Krishna and it's freed from any tendency of karma, jnana, so on and so forth. Pure devotional service. Okay, I'll end here. Any comments, any questions? Thank you very much. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande.